Kulo, yeah. We're in Memches and Beis, but at less than halfway down the page at Itmar, Rovin. Ravam connected Kula Hukaina or Bechanam connected connected. Sorry, connected Hukaina or Bechanam connected Kula Hukaina. Okay, so we said a Rovin is a partial payment. So you give a significant, you give a deposit on a large payment, and we call it initial payment, which is supposed to represent the commitment to buy the whole thing, and then the price changes. So the seller says, well, the price increased. So the seller wants to change his mind. So the seller says, I'll give you the amount of money of your deposit that's locked in, but everything else is not. Rav says it's fine. Okay, you acquire as much as your initial payment. Rabbi Yehudah says that you acquire the entire thing, and the seller can no longer change his mind. Asks the Gemara, somebody who gives an erovin to his friend. 1 second. Okay, this is a collateral. So what happens? He says as follows: This is what this is similar to a forfeitable deposit, where the guy says, if I change my mind, then you get to keep the deposit. And the other guy says, if I change my mind, and the seller says, if I change my mind, I don't want to sell it to you, then I'll give you double your collateral. So the Gemara says, that Rabbi Yossi says this is a valid condition. Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that says an asmachta works. What's an asmachta? Asmachta is a promise of exaggeration. Asmachta is what else is included under the rubric of asmachta? Gambling, right? Playing poker, let's say, it's included under the same category as asmachta, where you're sort of giving somebody money for no good reason. And this is what's going on. You're over here. The seller is agreeing to double the collateral if he changes his mind. That's sort of a giving money for no reason. That's considered an asmachta. The question is, is an asmachta valid? Is such a promise valid? And Rabbi Yossi says yes, it is. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yossi, if the seller withdraws, he has to pay 2 times the collateral. Rabbi Yehudah says, "Dai sheyiknai keneged arvayai." Rabbi Yehudah says the condition doesn't work. You acquire the sale in accordance with the amount of money that the collateral is worth. Amar Shimon Gamliel says, when is this true? Okay. This is only true if the guy says that he wants the collateral to serve as a vehicle of acquisition. Meaning, I agree to buy it from Eric $1,000 worth of grain. So I give him, a $500 deposit. Okay, I don't know, give him my computer, let's say, worth $500. Okay, now the deal is, if I don't buy it, then he gets to keep the computer. If he decides to change his mind, he owes me 2 computers. So Rabbi Yehudah says what actually happens is I acquire $500 worth of grain in the amount of the value of the computer. Rabbi Shimon says, no. The computer here was never intended on payment. It was a collateral. So actually, you don't acquire anything. If you said ervayni yikain, meaning you want the computer to serve as an initial payment, so then of course you acquire 500 worth. But if not, if you didn't mention that specifically, then it's just a collateral, and you don't even acquire 500. However, let's say change the story a little bit. Okay. So now we differentiate. This story was a story of collateral. Shimon says, but if there was a story of an initial payment where I bought something for $1,000, a field, and I paid half of it, and I intended that should be the initial payment for the entire field, so then the sale is done, and the rest we have to collect the details at some later point. It's too late to change your mind. Okay, 1 second. So now, if with regard to property, once you give an initial payment, the deal is sealed. Presumably, that should be true of movable items as well. If I make an initial payment of $500 and $1,000 worth of grain, that should seal the deal for the $1,000. It should be too late for anyone to change their minds. And if it's too late for them to change their minds, then even if the price goes up, the seller is locked in, and even if the price goes down, the buyer is locked in. Okay, so Gemara says, not my law, movable items would have the same law as property. 1 second. That an initial payment acquires the entire thing. So Gemara says, no, not necessarily. If you don't specify that should be the whole thing, it's not the case. So Gemara says, why is it different? Why is it that when you give money by property, you acquire the whole thing? And when you give the same amount of money by movable items, you acquire half, and the other half is mishapara. You get this penalty if you withdraw, spiritual penalty. 1 second. Okay, so the Gemara explains because property, kesef is a valid method of acquisition. That's why kesef serves as the initial payment for the entire thing. Because money is the way you acquire property, so money serves as the initial payment locks the whole field in. But because money does not work as a method of payment for movable items, so therefore money is not sufficient to be an initial payment. We don't consider, unless specified, we don't consider the money to be an initial payment for the entire thing. Because you typically need mashicha, money is not enough. That's because the money only works to give the guy the spiritual penalty, the same penalty that God gave to the generation of Stom and the floods. But it doesn't work to seal the kinyan. So if that's the case, it could be that it only seals the mishapara in proportion to the amount of payment that was given. Does not serve as an initial payment to encompass the entire deal. Yeah. Okay. Let me continue. Let's say this debate here between Rav and Rabbi Yehudah is the same as another debate. Somebody lends his friend with the collateral. And then you have the 7th year in the middle of the loan. Even though so he lent him $1,000, he only gave him a $500 watch for collateral. So it doesn't make a difference. The loan is not ended by Shemitah. We recall, Shemitah has a law of layigosh. You cannot ask for the loan. You can't ask to collect the loan after Shemitah. But it's not true if the loan has a collateral. Then you're allowed to collect the loan even after Shemitah. Okay. And the opinion of Shimon Gamliel is it doesn't make a difference in terms of the value of the collateral. Any collateral prevents the ending of the entire loan. Rabbi Yehudah says, if the loan is proportional to the value of if the collateral is proportional to the value of the loan, then the loan is still valid. You can no longer collect it. When Rav Shimon says the loan is not over, what does that mean? If it means proportionally, meaning the loan is, Rav Shimon says you borrowed $1,000, you gave $500 collateral. Rav Shimon says the loan is not over, meaning the 500 isn't over, proportionally. Well, if that's the case, Rabbi Yehudah holds that even that 500 is also ended. So the Gemara says, so then what benefit do you have by having a collateral, according to Rabbi Yehudah? We'll see. Maybe there is no benefit. It's just a smart thing to do. We'll get to that in a moment. Okay. Elalav must be. My Rav Shimon says that the entire loan remains valid and it does not end. And not just proportionally. The entire loan is valid because there's a collateral on a proportional amount. When Rabbi Yehudah talks about it does end the loan, what does he mean? Lahach palga. It means to that half. The line the mashkin, not the other half, not the half that has the collateral in it, that half the loan is ended. And this is a debate. Shimon says the collateral represents the entire loan, just like an initial payment seals the entire deal. And Rabbi Yehudah says no, a collateral only represents the proportional value of the collateral to the loan. So if the collateral is 500, it's $500 of the loan. That part of the loan is locked in Shemitah. Shemitah does not end it. Similarly, if you make a deal and I give you an initial payment, the initial payment is locked up as a mishapara, but not the whole thing. There would be no mishapara on anything more than the proportional amount of the initial payments. Okay. Gemara says, not necessarily. My am shamti amashim gamliel lahach palga dinakat alam ashkin. When Shmuel says Shemitah does not end alone, he means that half alone that has the collateral proportionally. Rabbi Yehudah Anasi says that even the half that has a collateral, Shemitah also ends. So the Gemara says asks the same question as the past, as we just saw. So what does it help that you have a collateral? So the Gemara says sort of to have the guy remember why he made a loan. But you're right; it doesn't really make a difference with regard to the laws of Shemitah. Okay, now we got to get to a few stories today. Rav Kahana Yavle Zuzi Akisna. Rav Kahana made a deal to buy flax. L'seifa Yakar Kisna. Then the flax increased in value, so he wants to change his mind. Also, made the Rav. So we went in front of Rav. Amalei b'mayda Nikita Zuzi Havlu. The Edach Dvarim Nenu Dvarim Ein Behem Mechusari Amona. Okay. The amount that you collected as down payment or as an initial payment, that amount of money you have to give. So you agreed to sell $100 worth. You agreed to sell $1,000 worth of flax. You took payment of 100. You have to sell the 100. The other 900, it's just words. And words, not only do you not have the penalty of mishapara, you don't even have the penalty of mechusar amona. You're not even considered lacking trust. The eighth number we learned, dvarim words. Rav Amar ein behem mishum mechusar amona. The fact that you change your mind on something that you said, it doesn't mean that you're someone who lacks trust. Rabbi Yochanan says there is a lack of trust if you change the words that you said. Question. Rav says that words do not have any category of loss of trust. The Gemara says the Torah says you should have accurate weights. You have a large measurement called an ephah, and you have a smaller measurement called a hin. And the Torah says make sure you have an accurate hin and an accurate ephah. Right? The equivalent of saying make sure that your ounces scale is good and make sure your gallon scale is good. Now, if you have a gallon scale, then presumably you can measure ounces as well. It's not, this is the two-sided scale, right? Not the modern single unit scale, the single dish scale. Okay, so if you can measure a large amount, you probably can measure a small amount on the same scale. The Torah has come to tell you so hin is a measurement, but it also can be read as hein, which is the Hebrew word for yes.
Which?
Yes,
Oh,
hein,
yes.
hein
Yeah, okay.
is yes, meaning that your yes and your no should be righteous. It should be weighed, meaning be careful with what you say, because if you say something and you don't keep it, it's considered a loss of trust. So the Gemara says, Abaye says, no. It doesn't mean that your yes and no should be accurate. You're allowed to change your mind. You shouldn't speak one way and in your heart feel a different way. You should speak and feel exactly in exactly the same manner. Okay. Meisvei. This question. Rav Shimon Aimer, Afa Pisha Amru Talis kind of dinner zov, the ein dinner zov kind of talis, even though pulling the cloak acquires the gold coin, and pulling the gold coin does not acquire the cloak. Mikal makam kachalacha. It's true that technically speaking, that's the law. If you pull the gold, you would not get the cloak. However, Amru, the rabbi said, Misha par manchadar mabo manchadar flaga, who was the par mishani b'diburi. God who took revenge from the generation of the flood and the dispersion, he will repay those that do not maintain their words. Okay, so now, 1 second. Okay, now clearly, the emphasis here of Reb Shimon was Einai Aymed B'diburai, somebody who doesn't keep to his words. So not only if you don't keep your word are you lacking trust, which is sort of a minor religious infraction, you actually get mishapara. You get a curse. So it's like a severe religious infraction. I should have pointed this out in the past. In general, we have two categories here. The most minor is called mechusar amana, lacking trust. We explained before that mechusar amana is not an effect when a new circumstance comes to pass. And we have the more severe level, the curse, which is mishapara. The God who took revenge from the generation of the flood and the dispersion will take revenge of people who, whichever group of category of people we're talking about, specifically in the mission, are those that give money, give a deposit, and change their mind. But over here, Reb Shimon is saying, even those who change their words. So Gemara says, Tanoi, it's a machlokes Tanam. The Tanam we learned, Ma'is Rabbi Yochanan ben Masya, She'amar L'bnai. There was a story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Masya. He told his son, "Say uschar lanu po'elim, go hire me some laborers." So he hired the laborers, and as traditionally the case, he promised them lunch. Okay, good deal, right? So you get the $10 an hour plus you have lunch. He went back to his father. His father says, hold on a second, you told him you're going to give him lunch with no strings attached. Even if you took him out to a steakhouse for lunch, you have not fulfilled your obligation of giving them lunch. They're the children of Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. They're entitled to a princely meal. There's no way you can ever fulfill that type of obligation to give them a princely dinner, a princely lunch. So therefore, what do you do? He says, run back to them before they start working and tell them, here's the deal. I can only give you bread and beans, the basic lunch that he had planned on giving them. Okay, so Gemara says, 1 second. There was a commitment here, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Masya's his son, promised lunch. And now his father says, oh, you got to give like a steakhouse lunch. Not going to work.
But there was no fixed official etched in law definition of what a
So
lunch is supposed to be.
so Rabbi Yochanan ben Masya is saying that because we're dealing with the princes of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, you have to give a princely meal, to give a king's dinner, White House. What do they call this?
White House
formal dinner. And it's not realistic. So he said to them, "Go back and tell them here's the deal. What's for lunch today? It's bread and beans."
Fair enough.
Okay, now the question is, he already gave a commitment. So how could he change his commitment? Clearly here, changing a verbal commitment is not even lacking trust. Don't respond yet. We'll get to your point. We'll resolve this very quickly. So hang on. If there's a problem, you lose trust by making a verbal commitment and changing it. How can he tell him to go change his mind? So the Gemara says, my timer made the idea Who made the deal here? It wasn't Rabbi Yochanan ben Masya, it was his son. Right? The workers recognized that his son has no authority. So therefore, they weren't convinced by the fact that the son promised them lunch that they were getting a formal White House dinner. So therefore, he was able to change the deal. So Gemara says, well, if that's the case, then presumably even if they started working, the law would be the same. Right? The law would be the same that the father should be able to change what his son says. So the Gemara says no. Okay, so if they started working, then the workers think presumably the son told the father agreed. So it's sort of a window where the father has to agree, which is between when the son committed until before they start working. If they started working, they presume that whatever the son said, the father agreed to. Okay, now Rabbi Yochanan says that changing your mind makes you mechusar amana. It has you losing your trust. Rabbi Yochanan say this. Rabbi Yochanan says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. A guy says to his friend, I'm giving you a gift. Yachal achsarba, he can change his mind. So the Gemara says, Yachal, he could, pshita. Obviously, he could change his mind. He never gave him the gift. So the Gemara says, Elamutter lachsarba. You're allowed to change your mind. What does that mean? That changing your mind from a verbal commitment is not even mechusar amana. You don't even lose trust for that. And there's a contradiction amongst Rabbi Yochanan. What did
Position, please, Rabbi.
about half the way down the wide lines?
Okay, first word is
Lachsarbai. Pshita, elamutter lachsarbai. So you're allowed to change your mind. So clearly, again, it's contradiction of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Papa, Rabbi Yochanan, Matanim Boetas Asamcha Datayu. So Papa explains it depends. If I promise I'm giving you a gift, Eric, I'm giving you my house or I'm giving you my car. It's a big gift, right? You don't really think, I'll believe it when I see it, right? However, let's say I promise, I hear that you're losing, you're borrowing a thing of vinegar. They say, you know what, Eric, I'm giving you my vinegar. I have an extra bottle of vinegar at home.
Take the car instead.
I'll have an extra bottle of vinegar at home. I'll give you the vinegar. Then you presume that I'm serious. Because the vinegar, what's a bottle of vinegar? It's $1 or $1.29, something like that. It's a very small amount of money. So in that case, you're relying on me. Because it makes sense that I would give you a bottle of vinegar. But if I give you my car or my house, it's a little excessive.
Rely on your sincerity there.
You'll believe it. You'll believe it when you see it. Okay. This makes sense. The Amr Bavu Amr B'Yechanan. Rabbi Vu explains the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Yisrael she'amar leben Levi kur ma'aser yesh l'cha b'yadi. So, Eric, you have a big field. You have a lot of meiser. It's going to the Levi. So you tell the Levi, I have a core of meiser, a bushel of meiser. I'm going to give it to you. Now, there's many Leviim, so you chose out Mr. Levi from all the Leviim, and you're going to give him the meiser. So the Gemara says, "Rishoy lasses chumas meiser al makam acher." He's allowed to take that, rely on that grain that you promised him. He's going to turn it into Trumas Meiser and give it to the Kohen on other grain that he got from other people. So the Gemara says, if it makes sense that because this is a small amount, why is it a small amount? Even though it's a bushel, but you have to give it to a Levi anyway. So it's really what the value of this bushel is what they call the browning points. You ever heard that expression? Mm-hmm. It's the brownie points you have versus giving it to Mr. Levi or giving it to Mr. Roth or Mr. Segal. And that brownie points is a small amount of money. It's not a lot. So therefore, we say that the commitment is sincere and you cannot change your mind. That's why the Kohen is allowed to rely on it for Trumas Meiser. You can change your mind. What happens if you don't actually give it to the Kohen? The Kohen turns out is eating tevel because he was relying on that grain to serve as a Trumas Meiser. If you don't actually give it to him, it can't serve as Trumas Meiser. Okay, clearly here that means that a small gift is, you promise somebody a small gift and you change your mind, you're in the category of mechusar amana, lacking trust. The Gemara says, well, maybe I can resolve this a little differently. Well, maybe actually the scenario is different. Maybe the scenario is where you already gave it to Mr. Levi, right? But he gave it back to you to watch. So the Gemara says that can't be. If that's the case, by the way, then of course you can take off Trumas Meiser because it belongs to the Levi. The Gemara says that can't be. Why not? Look at the end of the Bryson. Let's say you did change your mind. Then Mr. Levi could be upset at you. If you actually gave it to the Levi, then you're a thief for giving it to another Levi. It must be that you never actually gave it. All you gave was a verbal commitment. And a verbal commitment at a small amount of value is sufficient to be relied on. If a guy changes his mind, he's in the category of someone who lacks trust. Okay. We already had to take it. It's good proof. Okay. So we have a story, and we'll soon see. Maybe we can figure out who the protagonist of the story was. So this person gave money to buy sesame seeds. Eventually, the sesame seeds increased in value. So the seller decided he's changing his mind. And he says, "Less lunch shumshumi. I don't have any sesame seeds. Shkol zuzach, take your money." So the Gemara says, "Lo shakal zuzing." The guy was so mad he refused to take his money. What do you think happened? Igniv. The money was stolen. He went to Rava. Because the guy told you take the money and you didn't take it because you were mad. Not only are you not a shomer sachar, you're also not a shomer chinam, meaning you're not a watchman at all. In this case, in other words, the seller here who had the buyer's money and lied to the buyer, the seller is not responsible for the money that he told the buyer to take, because he told the buyer to take it, and the buyer did not listen. So the rabbi said to Rava, one second here. The seller is a thief. He's not a thief, but he's reneging on a commitment. They had a deal to buy the sesame seeds, and now he's all of a sudden changing his mind. He's lying about it. So he should get the curse of the generation of the flood and the dispersion. So the Gemara says, he said, yeah, you're right. He does. In other words, either the guy gives him the sesame seeds, or he takes the curse or he does not owe him the actual money that he's returned, and he gets the curse of Mishapara. So the curse is in effect. Okay, now we get to the details. Amr Papa. So Papa says, Amr li Ravina. L'didi Amr li Ahumar Rabbanon. Ravina says, I heard this story from the rabbi. And who was it? It was Rav Tava Shmei. The Amr, and some say it was Rav Shmuel Bar Zutra Shmei. And they told me the story was, and Ravina says, look, I heard the story. I'm the guy in the story. I'm the seller. And the truth of the matter is that you give me all the money in the world, I would never change my mind. But what was the actual story? The story was actually like this. It was Friday afternoon. And I was sitting down, and a guy came to my door, and he asked me if I have sesame seeds to sell. I said to him, no, I don't have. Because the whole story was wrong. Instead of the story, the guy lied about the sesame seeds. No, he asked if there were sesame seeds, and Ravina said, no, I don't have. So he says, I said, so the guy says, 1 second, I have this money here. I need to buy sesame seeds with it. Can you watch the money? Because Shabbos is coming, I can't carry it. I said to him, here's a house, you can put it in the house. So what happened? He put it in the house, and it was stolen. Also came to Rava. Say we went in front of Rava. The fact that I offered him to put the stuff in my house does not mean that I accept the responsibility. So Ravina was saying here that the story was all wrong. He actually didn't have sesame seeds to sell. The guy asked him to watch the money, and he told him you can watch it in the house. And Rava says that Ravina is not responsible as a shomer, as a watchman. The Gemara says, what do you mean? What about that other detail? Basically, that story that the rabbis told Rava that there's a Mishapara here never happened. It wasn't part of the story. Okay, next Gemara. Whoever has the money, he has the upper hand. Tanya, we learned. Reb Shimon taught. Okay, Amosai, what's the story here? We'll explain the mission. The seller has the grain. He also got the $1,000 payment. He's able to change his mind. He has the upper hand. But if the money is in the hands of the buyer and the grain is in the hands of the seller, he can't change his mind because his money is in his hands. The Gemara says, the money is in the hands of the seller. Meaning that the buyer here has the value of his money in his hands. Meaning the sale effectively looks consummated, right? Typically at the end of a sale, the seller has the money and the buyer has the goods, which is exactly what happened. So the Gemara says, Pshita, obviously you can't change your mind. You consummated a relationship here, right? They had a deal, you executed it, now it's done. Of course you can't change your mind, it's over. So the Gemara says, it was an interesting scenario. What happened here was the buyer owned the seller's attic. So that the seller was selling grain, and the buyer owned the warehouse space where the grain was. What happens? Says Reb Shimon, why did the rabbi say you need to do Mashicha? Because we're afraid that maybe the grain in the storage house and the attic will be burnt. Maybe there'll be a fire and it won't be saved. Over here, however, the grain is in the buyer's domain, right? Because the buyer rented space to the seller. So enough of the lake of Inus. If there's a fire, then the buyer will have to rescue his own property. So therefore, if Shimon says this decree of the sages is dynamic in a scenario where it's not relevant because the buyer rented space to the seller, and it's actually the grain is in the buyer's space. So then the buyer acquires it with money alone. Okay, a guy spent money to buy wine. Let's say there was a general whose name was Parzik. He was coming to town, and Parzik and his generals were known to confiscate all the wine, as was common. If you remember, we had the Gemara in Subas. We spoke about this as well there. They would confiscate all the wine and they'd all drink it. So the buyer says, "Look, what's going to happen? The general is going to come to town, and what am I buying all this money of? Why am I buying all this wine? The general is just going to confiscate it. Let me withdraw from the sale. The general will confiscate it from the seller then." So Amalei Havli Zuzi Lebeina Chamer. He says, "Give me back my money. I don't want the wine." Also, went in front of Rav Chizda. Amalei Kederush Tikni Mashicha B'Mayatram Kach Tikni Mashicha B'Lekuchas. The purpose of this benefit was for both the buyer and the seller to withdraw, and you're within your rights to withdraw from the deal. Good. Okay, let's begin the next Mishnah. I know. Our Boa Kesef. By the way, Steve, your question I know we'll get to tomorrow. Okay, what's I know? I know is overcharging or under delivering, under overcharging or underpaying. I know our Boa Kesef, me Esrim Ba'arba Kesef. It's 4 coins out of 24. It's a sixth, 16.7%. Okay, Shtus Lamekach, a sixth of the deal. Ad Motzei Mutter Lahachzer. How? Okay, so let's say you. Okay, so let's explain. We have 2 things if I know. Okay, let's say I charge you. I buy you. You have $100 worth of grain. You charge me $115. Okay, what's the story? What's the halacha? It's legitimate. No, it's legitimate. $15 is less than a sixth.
Oh, okay.
Of $100 of grain, and that's fine. That's normal. That's acceptable. Nothing happens. Let's say you charge me $130 for the grain. What happens? So then we call that bitul mekach. It's not called a no. It's called bitul mekach. The sale is not valid. Let's say you charge me $116.67. So then we say that we call that a no, and you have to return $16.67 to me.
Like price controls?
Not quite. It's sort of
Extortion.
extortion. It's a better word.
Oh,
Okay, now.
I do like that word better.
So now, remember, we have 3 words here, okay? We have mechila, forgiveness. That's what happens when I buy it for 115. We have bitul mekach, nullification of the sale. That's what happens when I buy it for 130. And then we have a no. A no literally means pain, and that's what happens when it's 116.67.
Right.
Okay, that's what a no is. And tomorrow we'll deal in more detail with exactly what these numbers mean. Very strict definitions. Okay. Ad masamoto lahachzer. How long do you have? So I realize in a second, $116 is well more than the normal price in the market. So how long do I have to go and get back my $16 from Eric? So Gemara says, it's a very small amount of time. It's a time you have to show it to another merchant or a relative, and realize that you were cheated. After that amount of time, you're no longer entitled to get a refund. Hire Reb Tarfon Belud, Reb Tarfon in the town of Lud, taught them, he said it was a third. So it would be $33 out of every 100. The merchants of Lud were very happy. These guys were very, very skilled salesmen, and they would easily be able to upcharge that which they were brokering. So they were very happy they could upcharge 33%. Amr Lahem, so Reb Tarfon said to them, 1 second, there's a catch. The rabbis say you have like a couple of minutes to go ask the merchant next door. Reb Tarfon says you have an entire day to change your mind. Amr Loi, so the people of the merchants of Lud, they weren't so happy. They said to them, "Yiniach lana Rav Tarfon b'mkamenu v'chazal d'v'chav." They said, "Let's ignore the opinion of Rav Tarfon, even though it's true we can do better deals and cheat more people out of money, but at the same time they also have more time to go back, change their mind, and therefore we'd rather the opinion of the rabbis that we only have a smaller margin, 16.6%, than have the opinion of Rav Tarfon and have much longer amount of time to change their minds."